I just wanted to bring lunch to my wife, the CEO of a big company. But the moment I stepped into the lobby, the sign in front of me made me stop. Authorized personnel only. I told the guard I was Mrs. Rhodes's husband. He laughed the kind of laugh that's half doubt, half pity, and said, "Sir, I see her husband every day. There he is coming out right now." I turned my head. A younger man in a sharp gray suit walked out of the elevator with an easy, familiar confidence, as if the place belonged to him. I stood still holding a warm latte, my heart clenched tight. I could have yelled, demanded answers, but I just smiled, nodded, and said softly, "I'm just a family friend." Then, as the door closed, I opened my notebook and wrote the first line. Thursday, 2:17 p.m. I just met the man the world calls my wife's husband. If you're still here, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Every comment helps this story reach more hearts, and if it moved you, give it a like so others can find it too. My name is Harold Benton, and I'm 57 years old. For 30 years, I've lived a simple, steady life. In the suburbs of Boston, a husband, a small-time accountant, a man who believes happiness lives in ordinary things. Cooking dinner with my wife, morning coffee and a newspaper, a small laugh in a sunlit kitchen. My wife, Vivian Rhodes, is different. She's always reached for the top, for ambition, and the spotlight of the business world. I was proud of her, loved the distance between us, and believed it was the price of growing up. But that afternoon, when the guard said, "Her husband just left," I realized sometimes what we call peace is just an illusion, held together by blind faith. I still remember the afternoon light, cold golden rays cutting through high glass and glinting off polished granite floors. The Solstice Dynamics building stood in downtown Boston, a proud block of steel and glass, as lofty as the female CEO I'd called my wife for 28 years, Vivian Rhodes. That morning, she left the house in a cream suit, a trace of Dior J'adore trailing behind, and rushed. "Scout, don't wait for lunch, I'll be in meetings all day." I smiled and said I'd order something later, but I'd already planned the opposite, her favorite grilled chicken sandwich with a hot latte. Just a small gesture, but I believed it would make her happy. I didn't expect that a few hours later, that small gift would become the first piece of evidence in a nightmare. When a man named Cole Maddox, who I later learned was the company's vice president, walked out, he smiled warmly at the guard. "Good afternoon, Mark," he said, confident and polished. Mark nodded. "Yes, Mr. Sterling, I mean, Mr. Maddox, Mrs. Rhodes is waiting for you in the conference room." They both chuckled, easy, like it happened every day. I stood there, stepping back a bit so no one would notice my shaking hand. I held the brown paper bag with the sandwich and the napkin she'd stitched with her initials, V.R. Those tiny details suddenly tasted bitter. I left the building but didn't start the car. I sat there, letting the clock tick minute by minute, and logged everything like an accountant by habit. 2:17 p.m. Saw Cole Maddox, around 40, half a head taller than me. Guard confirmed. "Sees Mrs. Rhodes's husband every day," I wrote with trembling hands. Not out of anger because I couldn't quite believe it yet. My phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. "Board meetings are running long. Don't wait up, eat first. Love you." Love you was still there, like always, but today it felt heavy and false. I drove around downtown, trying to calm myself. Maybe it's just a misunderstanding. Maybe he's a close partner and people joke like that. But deep down, a cold voice asked, "How many times has she lied and you missed it?" I pulled over by the Charles River, watching red maples glitter on the water. They say, at 57, men fear two things, sickness and loneliness. I never thought I'd fear the second until that afternoon. Back home, our two-story house in Newton was as quiet as always. But the quiet was different. Everything was in its place. Our wedding photo on the wall, the ceramic bowl she made in that pottery class, the apron I bought for our 25th anniversary. Only now, nothing felt alive. It was like a stage after the curtain falls and I was standing among dead props. I made black tea, sat at the table, and stared at the empty chair across from me. 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9:15. The door opened. Vivian stepped in, heels tapping softly across the hardwood. "Oh, Harold, I'm exhausted. Meetings nonstop. Did you eat?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "I did. You're so thoughtful." She smiled, took off her earrings, and poured a glass of red wine like always. I watched every gesture, the way she swirled the glass, the quiet exhale after the first sip. All of it was too familiar, too perfect, as if she'd rehearsed to keep me from noticing anything else. "I stopped by your office today," I said, keeping my voice even. She paused for half a second, then smiled. "Really? I didn't get any coffee. The guard must have mixed someone up." "Yeah, maybe." I looked into the eyes I'd once believed were the most honest in the world. She still smiled, still bright, still the woman I'd loved for nearly 3 decades. But for the first time I saw something missing in that smile, something not quite true. When she went upstairs to shower, I stayed in the kitchen, watching light pool through the half-finished wine in her glass. I thought about the guard's words, the grin on the man in the gray suit, that confident look. That night, I lay beside Vivian, listening to her steady breathing. The familiar perfume filled the air, but to me, it felt foreign. I realized the woman sleeping beside me might no longer be my wife, or maybe she'd never truly been who I thought she was. I opened my phone, turned on notes, and wrote a last line before the dark took me. Day 1 of the truth. The next morning, I called my office and said I'd work from home. My voice was steady, but my hands shook as I poured coffee. The dark brown mug clicked against the table, a dry sound in a kitchen that used to be warm. I took a deep breath and told myself maybe yesterday was a misunderstanding. But instincts don't lie, and mine were screaming. I stepped into Vivian's home office, where she read financial reports at night. The desk gleamed no stray paper, not a pen out of place. I'm an accountant. I know when a space is too neat, someone's hiding something. In the second drawer, I found a stack of receipts. One stopped my blood cold. Le Chien, the French restaurant where we celebrate our anniversaries, dated 6 weeks ago, for 2, with a bottle of Pinot Noir 2018. I remember that night Vivian said she had dinner with a female client from Portland, a promising deal. I even wished her good luck closing. Now, looking at the receipt, I saw 2 entrees, no starters, no dessert, no company notation, nothing coded as client, just 2 people, an intimate dinner. I sat down and called her. "Hey, how'd the Portland deal go?" I asked lightly, like it just came to mind. A beat of silence, then Vivian answered, flat and even. "Didn't close." "They went local," I said softly. "Oh, that's a shame," and hung up. The words floated by like a breath, but they told me everything I'd believed might be a lie. That afternoon, I opened the credit card statement she usually used. I pay the bills, but I'd never looked closely. Trust can make you blind. In the long parade of numbers, patterns didn't match. Lunches in Beacon Hill, where she said she never went. Multiple gas stops in far-flung suburbs. Restaurant charges for just 2 meals. I noted each line, each date, each figure like solving a math problem whose answer I dreaded. I was about to close the laptop when a soft ping popped up, a calendar alert. A small window flashed. Dinner, Bellora, 7:00 p.m. C. Maddox. I sat still for a few seconds, reading it again and again. C. Maddox. Now the name rang in my head like metal on stone. I didn't click anything else. I just stared at the line until the screen dimmed. Around 6, Vivian came home early. She changed into a black fitted dress, the birthday gift from last year she'd once called pretty but too fussy for work. She walked downstairs, window light shimmering across her blonde hair. "Harold," she said softly, "I think we should go out tonight. It's been a while since we did something spontaneous." I looked at her bright smile, shining eyes. If I hadn't seen that calendar alert, I might have believed her. "Great idea," I said. "Where do you want to go?" She pressed her lips, calculating. "Maybe that new place on 5th, or never mind. I just remembered I have a call with a Tokyo office at 7:30 p.m. It might run until 10 p.m. I'm so absent-minded." She smiled as she spoke, but I saw her hand tighten on her purse strap. "No problem," I answered quietly. "I'll eat at home." She leaned down and kissed my cheek, her perfume familiar and strange. "You're always so easygoing." "I'm lucky." The door clicked shut, her heels fading away. I stayed put, listening to my heartbeat fill the empty space. At 8:20 p.m., I drove out. I had no set destination. My hand simply turned the wheel toward downtown. When I passed Ballora, I saw them right away. Vivian's silver BMW tight to the curb beside a familiar black Mercedes. Both engines were off, but I recognized her silhouette inside the shape of her hair, the hand lifting a wine glass. I didn't go in. I just watched through the glass as she tilted her head and laughed, candlelight flickering in her eyes. That smile used to belong to me. A cold wind swept by, carrying broken yellow leaves. I started the car and turned around. No rage, no shouting, just silence, the heaviest kind there is. And I knew, in that moment, the last thin strand of hope in me snapped. 3 days later, I reorganized the bedroom desk drawer. I do it monthly, tidying bills, papers, little things Vivian always leaves lying around. But today, among bank envelopes and an old ballpoint, something made me stop. A small key on a metal fob etched Harbor Ridge Apartments. I'd never heard of it. The key was icy in my palm, bright like it had been used recently. I sat for a long moment, listening to the clock tick, then searched my phone. Harbor Ridge, an upscale complex about a 30-minute drive from our house, near the Mystic River. That afternoon, I drove there. The road in was smooth blacktop flanked by maples shedding leaves. At the gate, a young guard asked who I was visiting. I said I was waiting for a friend, and he waved me through. I parked in guest parking, hands on the wheel, heart racing. Part of me wanted to turn around, go home, pretend I knew nothing. But the part that had endured enough fake smiles whispered, "If you don't open that door, you'll stay blind in your own life." I waited nearly 15 minutes, counting heartbeats, until the familiar black Mercedes pulled in. Cole Maddox stepped out in a white shirt, carrying a tote and some dry cleaning. He didn't look around, didn't rush, just popped the trunk, grabbed a grocery bag, and headed inside like a man coming home. I watched from a distance as he badged up to the 3rd floor. The door shut. I waited 10 more minutes, then went in. The hallway was quiet, new carpet, warm amber lights. I followed the numbers #212, #213, then #214. My heart hammered as I slid the key into the lock, a small click-perfect fit. I opened the door and stepped inside. The air held Vivian's familiar perfume, the one she only wears on special occasions. The apartment was bright, tasteful, well-equipped, but what stopped me cold was the cozy feel, too intimate. On the coffee table sat a photo, Vivian and Cole on a beach, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, both smiling under a sunset. On the sofa, throw pillows in sea green patterns exactly her style. On the shelves, books she'd said she wanted to read but had no time. Now they sat neat, pages dog-eared and little handwritten notes in her script. I walked slowly through each corner, feeling like I was viewing a parallel version of my marriage, only I wasn't in it. In the bedroom, the closet door hung open, her dresses nestled between his shirts. On the vanity were 2 toothbrushes, 2 glasses, and a jar of La Mer what she'd once said was too expensive to buy. Every small detail was a confession. In the kitchen, a thick folder lay on the stone counter, the cover labeled Future Plans, V, R, and C, M. I opened it. Inside were suburban home listings, travel brochures for Italy, and a restructuring plan for Solstice Dynamics. The bolded line in the middle made me freeze. Proposed leadership transition. Cole Maddox, Chief Executive Officer Vivian Rhodes, President. I flipped more pages. At the bottom was a slim envelope from the law firm Benton and Ward, downtown Boston. I slid out the sheet. The header read, Consultation Notes, Divorce Strategy. Vivian had met them twice in the last 4 months. I read the scribbled bullets. Grounds. Husband emotionally distant, lacks ambition, does not support wife's career goals. Collect evidence. Homebody habits, lifestyle incompatibility. Objective. Divide assets in a way favorable to client. I set the page down and sat quietly at the table. No anger, no tears, just something cold and heavy spreading in my chest. Clarity. In that moment, I knew our marriage had ended long ago. I'd simply arrived at its funeral, months after the other two. I took out my phone and photographed every page, every corner, every piece of proof. Not for revenge, but to remember. I wasn't imagining this. The cracks were real. Then I closed the door and locked it with the very key she'd carelessly left behind. As I stepped out, the late light faded over the lot, glinting off the black Mercedes's glass. I looked at it for a moment, slipped the key into my pocket, and one line echoed inside me. The truth, once opened, never goes back. I came home just as the clock struck 8 p.m. Boston air had turned crisp, wood smoke drifting from nearby houses. The living room lights were on, and Vivian's laptop sat open on the kitchen counter, the screen still awake. She often worked late, but this time, instead of passing by like always, I stopped. A subject line hit me. Transition timeline. Discussion notes, V, R, and C. M. I moved the cursor, heart thudding. Emails between Vivian and Cole, packed with contract cold phrasing. Finalize leadership transition after internal audit. Communicate narrative with board and media. Coordinate public perception regarding personal changes. Personal changes. 2 tidy words for betrayal. I scrolled. Another email from Benton and Ward. Subject. Preparing Harold for emotional transition. Short and neat. Keep a compassionate tone. Avoid direct blame. Focus on the natural distance narrative. Prepare how to speak with friends and internal comms, and prevent him from telling the story first. I sat still. In planning to leave me, Vivian had even scripted how to shape the story as if I were just a variable to be managed. I kept reading. Another email to her sister, Martha. Harold is getting more distant. He just sticks to his office in the backyard. Maybe a midlife crisis. I've tried to be patient. Every line cut deep. The months I stepped back to give her room to push forward, she labeled distance. My patience became apathy. My trust became lack of care. I wasn't only betrayed in the present, my past was stolen too. I leaned back and looked around the familiar kitchen. Every memory felt tinted with lies. She hadn't only cheated, she'd rewritten our story, detail by detail, memory by memory, turning me into a supporting character in my own life. Near 11 p.m., I heard the garage door. Vivian came in with a tired smile, perfume trailing, and that assured look still in her eyes. "Still up?" she asked, slipping off her heels, then launched into a smooth recap of client hospitality with Cole to close a contract. I nodded, even and calm. "Sounds like you two work together really well." She gave a small smile, and her eyes lit the shine reserved for someone she admired. "Yeah, Cole really gets me. With him, the company runs so much smoother." I stayed quiet, pouring water into a glass, the sound stretching the space between strangers. That night, when she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and counted 28 years of marriage. The nights I cooked alone while she stayed late at the office. The business trips I sent off with, "Take care," and she answered, "Thanks. You're so thoughtful." I'd been proud to be the steady one, the one who understood her. But now, lying next to her, all I felt was cold. She turned over and her hand brushed my shoulder out of habit. I didn't pull away. I just lay there and let the foreignness spread. One question kept ringing. Who is the woman lying next to me? I had no answer. Only that she wasn't the woman I married 30 years ago, the one who hugged me through our first winter when we couldn't even afford a heater. Saturday morning, early light spilled across the kitchen table. I got up, brewed coffee, and set the future plans folder from the leather case in the center of the table right next to her cup. I watched it sit there, neat and square, a wordless declaration. No drama, no smashing, no shouting, just the absolute stillness of someone who finally understands. Today, I was no longer the husband in the dark. I was the man about to tear open the curtains she's woven for years with words, plans, and lies. And when Vivian came down the stairs, I was ready. In front of her, on the table, lay the entire story she'd tried to rewrite. Vivian's heels sounded softly on the hardwood. She stopped when she saw the folder in the center of the table, straight. No note, no memo, just silence as thick as a brick wall. Morning light spilled through the window onto her face, and for a fleeting second I saw something I hadn't seen in 30 years, real fear. But only for a moment. She drew a deep breath, set her coffee cup down, and said with eerie calm, "How much do you know?" I looked straight into her eyes. "Everything," I answered slowly. "The Harbor Ridge apartment, the fake schedules, the divorce consults, and the company restructuring plan where you make him CEO and you take president." Vivian didn't flinch, didn't justify. She exhaled lightly, as if I'd confirmed what she'd already prepared to hear. "This," she said softly, "only makes things more complicated." I let out a thin laugh. "Complicated? You call cheating on your husband for 2 years complicated?" She pulled out a chair across from me, her gaze steady. "Harold, you have to understand our marriage has been dead for a long time. You just haven't been willing to see it." "Dead since when?" I asked. She considered, then said, "Probably since you settled for your small life. You stopped dreaming, stopped wanting anything beyond peace and quiet. And I need more than that." I braced my hands on the table, my voice low but firm. "More than that means betrayal?" Vivian shook her head, a thread-thin smile. "No, Harold. It means living truthfully. You only see betrayal. I see evolution." I smiled, but not because it was funny. "Do you love him?" I asked, blunt, without circling. She was silent for a few seconds. Her eyes fell to the cup in front of her. "Yes," she said. "In a way, I never loved you." The answer dropped into the kitchen like a stone into still water. I could hear my heart crack. "And your plan?" I asked, even. She nodded. "Next month I'll file. Once things at the company stabilize, Cole and I will have a small Christmas ceremony. Nothing flashy, just immediate family on both sides." I looked at her. She said, "Both sides of the family," as if I'd never belonged to one of them. Vivian went on, her voice light but sharp, like a boardroom presentation. "Harold, we both know you deserve someone who understands you better. Someone who also likes a quiet life and small routines. I've gone too far from that place. I don't want to ruin both our images with a messy divorce. I just want a clean, civilized ending." I gave a dry laugh. "Civilized. You do pick your words." She didn't react, just added, "You know, there's no villain here. We're just changing." I stood up. The pain in me wasn't blazing anymore. It was cold, hard, metallic. "No villain, Vivian? What about the years I cooked alone, believing every late meeting text? The nights I worried you were exhausted while you were in another apartment? That's changed to you. Vivian didn't answer. She looked down at her hands, red polish catching the sun. A flicker of fatigue crossed her face. Then she lifted her head. I don't expect you to understand. I just want you not to stand in the way. I studied her for a long moment. The woman in front of me wasn't the one who'd weathered storms with me, wasn't the one who held my hand at our simple wedding. In her place was someone else, sharp, calculating, convinced that every wound can be explained by ideals. I spoke softly, my voice dropping. Vivian, actions have consequences. She arched a brow, a thin smile. Is that a threat? I'm reminding you of a simple rule. I picked up the coffee cup, rinsed it, and turned my back on the kitchen. Behind me, I heard a sigh, then the scrape of a chair. She didn't follow. As I reached the stairs, the phone rang downstairs. Vivian's voice changed completely, relieved, buoyant, even a little giddy. Yeah, it's done. He knows everything. Now it's just a matter of time. Her voice lowered, then a small laugh. No, he won't make a scene. Harold's always like that, calm to the point of being scary. Maybe everyone has a limit. But hearing her laugh right after the betrayal, I couldn't tell what hurt more, the lie or the liar's ease. What do you think? Between calm and numb, where is Harold standing? Leave your thoughts below. I want to read every single one. I stopped on the stair, gripping the railing. That line cut deeper than any blade. I went to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, the place that used to be a nest, now just a cold memory. Outside, the sun had risen high, threading through the window like a thin gold strand. I looked at my hands, calloused by years, and understood the man from yesterday was gone. Only today's me remained silent, clear-eyed, ready to bury the old version of myself. Monday was gray and cold. I put on my old coat and went to the office of attorney Douglas Klein, the man who helped us draft our will 10 years ago. The brass nameplate still hung by the door, the same one Vivian once called tasteful and trustworthy. Now I wasn't sure she believed in anything but self-interest. Douglas shook my hand, brows raised with concern. Harold, it's been a while. I hope this isn't bad news. I set the folder on his desk. I'm afraid it's worse than you think. He turned each page: apartment photos, emails, divorce consult notes, the company restructuring plan. His usually calm face tightened. When he finished, he took off his glasses, leaned back, and said, "This is a meticulously engineered divorce strategy, and your wife, with all respect, has prepared very thoroughly." I stayed quiet. He went on. Massachusetts is a no-fault state, meaning the court doesn't need to assign blame to grant a divorce. But, he paused, meeting my eyes, using marital assets to fund an affair will directly affect the property ruling. Adultery isn't prosecuted, but spending on it doesn't get ignored. I nodded and opened my laptop. I've prepared some analysis. I'm an accountant, after all. Douglas gave a tired smile. Of course you have. I pulled up the spreadsheet. Vivian's income, $200,000 a year. For the past 3 years, spending has exceeded that by about $60,000 a year. Meanwhile, I bring in only $120,000. I contributed $80,000 to the joint account, most of it covering her bills. I brought up the statements and pointed to recurring monthly charges. Here's the Harbor Ridge rent. Here are Miami travel expenses. Same time she said she was at a women's leadership conference. And here gifts from Cartier, shipped to Cole Maddox's address. Douglas leaned in, studying closely, and slowly shook his head. All from the joint account? All of it, I said. Every withdrawal labeled corporate representation expenses. Turns out I've been subsidizing my own wife's relationship. The air got heavy. Douglas said nothing for a while, tapping his pen lightly on the wood. Then he looked up. Harold, I know this is personal, but you need to understand beyond the marriage there's a serious legal issue here. I frowned. Legal? Yes. If what you're saying about the company is accurate, Vivian shifting operational authority to Cole without board approval, she could be violating her fiduciary duty. As CEO, she's obligated to report any structural changes or senior appointments. Doing that in secret, especially involving someone she's romantically involved with, is a significant professional ethics breach. I leaned back, feeling both hurt and clear-headed. So what do I do now? Douglas closed the folder, voice decisive. You have to file first. If she files, she'll control the narrative, turning you into a middle-aged crisis case, unattractive, living off his wife. You need to flip it. Filing first means you set the terms. I looked at him and nodded. And one more thing, he added, notify Solstice Dynamics' board. Keep it neutral. Don't make it personal, frame it as a governance issue. That way she can't pin this on you. I sat still for a few seconds. All my life, I'd protected Vivian. I'd fixed errors in her tax reports, guaranteed a loan when her company was in trouble, kept quiet about rumors she was close with a colleague. But this morning, I knew it was time to stop being a shield for someone who used me as the backdrop for her lies. Douglas watched me, a touch of sympathy in his eyes. Do you still love her? I smiled, light as a breeze. I love the woman I thought she was, not the one sitting in her office now. He nodded. Good, because now you need your head more than ever. When I left the office, the pale gray sky had deepened to blue. I stopped at the door, watching foot traffic along Tremont Street, and realized, once you've seen certain truths, you can't shut your eyes again. I drove straight to Solstice Dynamics headquarters. Before I went in, I pulled up an old contact, Eleanor Briggs, chair of the board, whom I'd met at several company events. I took a breath and called. Eleanor, this is Harold Benton, I said, slow and clear. I need to speak with you about some internal governance issues at Solstice. On the other end, after a beat of silence, came a low, steady voice. Harold, I've always appreciated your candor. Go ahead, what's going on? I looked up at the gleaming glass tower where Vivian sat in the CEO's chair and said, This concerns the integrity of the person leading the company. 3 days after the call with Eleanor Briggs, the news spread faster than I expected. Solstice Dynamics Board of Directors convened an emergency meeting. In the notice sent to Vivian, there was a line in bold, reviewing transparency in the senior leadership restructuring process. I wasn't in that meeting, but what happened inside was relayed to me in many voices: employees, former colleagues, even someone who worked in the office complex. They said the room was suffocatingly silent. Vivian was asked to account for the entire delegation of authority over the past 3 years, from letting Cole run international business to the plan to appoint him CEO. She presented in her usual calm, confident tone, but this time, the numbers were no longer on her side. The board uncovered a long chain of verbal authorizations, no minutes, no signed confirmations. Several major contracts approved by Cole exceeded his authority. And worst of all, the personal relationship between the two had never been disclosed as required by professional ethics rules. When a member asked, Miss Rhodes, do you admit that this personal relationship affected your business decisions? Vivian was silent. They said she just sat there, the thin smile fading from her face. The decision came that same afternoon. Cole Maddox was terminated, effective immediately, for violating professional standards and failing to disclose a conflict of interest. As for Vivian, the woman once seen as the symbol of Solstice, she wasn't removed, but her operational authority was suspended. The board appointed a new COO, Miss Linda Carrington, to oversee all financial and personnel decisions. Inside the company, they called it a brand reputation preservation measure. In just 1 week, the image of the strong, accomplished woman I once loved and who once blinded me began to crack in public. The Harbor Ridge apartment was quietly vacated, the belongings moved out at night. Cole left Boston for Denver to work at a smaller company, earning barely a third of his former salary. I heard the news without joy and without gloating. I felt only emptiness, as if justice had arrived, but too late to mean anything. That evening, Vivian came to see me. She stood on the front steps, thinner, tired, her once sharp eyes carrying something between pride and bitterness. "You ruined my career," she said. No preamble, no tears. I sat down and looked at her through the doorway. "No, Vivian. I just stopped shielding your choices." She gave a dry, knowing smile, the kind that once made people in the business world nervous. "You always love to speak in principles. Real life isn't that simple." "Right," I said, "because I spent 30 years believing I was in a real marriage. Turns out it was just a time-limited investment project." She said nothing. The porch light slanted across a face once familiar, now so foreign I had to look carefully to recognize the woman who used to be my wife. After a few minutes, her tone shifted softer, as if negotiating in a boardroom. "Harold, we can stop here. I can ensure you keep most of the assets, the house, even your retirement fund. In return, you stay quiet. No need to drag this out." I studied her for a long time. Perhaps deep down, Vivian still thought I was the gentle, predictable man who would accept a deal to keep the peace. "You still don't understand," I said quietly. "I don't need peace. I need the truth." Silence settled. Then she nodded, lips pressed tight. "You've changed, Harold." "I haven't changed," I said. "It's just the first time I'm not letting someone else define my kindness." Vivian turned away and stepped slowly down the stairs. When her car pulled off, the shadow trailing behind it cut the driveway like a blade. That night, I sat in my study, opened my laptop, and looked at Douglas's contact name. The cursor blinked over a half-written message. "It's time. File the papers." I hit send. For the first time in months, I felt light. Not because revenge was satisfied, but because I finally stopped living to protect a lie. The next morning, Douglas called back, voice steady and firm. "Harold, the filing is in. From here on, she can't write the story her way anymore." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. Outside the window, December wind rushed through bare branches, flipping the morning paper on the porch. I stepped out, picked it up, and saw a small headline in the finance section. "Solstice Dynamics. Board appoints new COO, CEO placed under oversight." I folded the paper. No smile, no anger. Just a calm peace, not from a win, but from finally lifting my head. 3 months later, the divorce case officially went to court. No more flowery words or practiced glances, just lawyers, numbers, and blunt truths. Vivian's team arrived early, an imposing legal squad, matching suits, confident eyes. She avoided looking at me, occasionally whispering to her counsel. Everything I once loved, her smile, her posture, that gaze I used to trust, now looked like a role rehearsed to perfection. Douglas leaned in and said quietly, "They'll try to paint you as emotionally distant, detached, disconnected. Don't react. Let the truth speak." And as predicted, they opened with a long narrative. I was cast as the tired, closed-off middle-aged man who no longer cared about his wife's emotional life. They said the marriage broke due to natural drift, not infidelity. Vivian sat still, face calm, hands clasped in front of her. When her lawyer said, "drift," I caught her glance flick toward me, an instant of confidence, as if the board was already set. Then Douglas stood. He opened a thick file, his voice low but clear. "Your Honor, my client needs no defense. He needs the truth," he began. Emails between Vivian and Cole, intimate tone, talk of our future. photos of the Harbor Ridge apartment, evidence of cohabitation, receipts from restaurants, jewelry stores, hotels, all from the joint account, credit card statements with Vivian's electronic signature matching dates and locations of her business trips. Douglas stopped at just the right moments, letting silence say the rest. Opposing counsel's faces changed. The room went still. Only the judge's pen tapped lightly on the desk. After a while, their swagger was gone. "Our side," the lead attorney said, "is willing to discuss an equitable division of assets." I didn't speak, just gave Douglas a small nod. You don't win this with shouting. You win with evidence and resolve. In mediation, I chose to keep the house, the one I'd lived in for nearly 30 years, where the walls still held laughter from the days before the break. The remaining assets were divided by formula, but the funds Vivian had spent on the affair were deducted directly from her share. The court recorded plainly, Miss Vivian Rhodes used marital assets for improper personal purposes, adversely affecting the other party's rights. No one said anything more. It ended as quietly as it began, a marriage concluding not in a storm, but in the stark loneliness of two people who once knew each other well. A few days later, Solstice Dynamics' internal channels leaked the divorce. No confirmation was needed. Vivian's image, the once lauded leader praised for vision and ethical leadership, began to collapse. Employees whispered behind her, and the looks she got walking the halls were no longer respect, but pity edged with chill. She sent me one message: "You've won. I hope you're happy." I didn't reply. I didn't need to win. I just needed to stand upright without shame. On the day the final judgment was issued, Boston saw an early snow. I left the courthouse in my old coat, hands freezing, heart unexpectedly light. Douglas shook my hand and said softly, "You know, Harold, not everyone has the courage to step out of their own shadow." I only smiled. Not out of pride, but because I finally understood some breakups aren't failures, they're the truth returning to its place. A week later, I moved into a small Beacon Hill apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it had a big window over a street lined with golden maples. I bought a new pan, a simple set of dishes, and learned to cook dinner for one. Not to fill a void, but to learn to live without needing someone else to validate my worth. That first night, I sat by the window, watching snow fall over the street, a cup of hot tea in my hands. No phone buzzing, no evenings waiting for a door to open, just quiet, the kind I once feared, now a companion. I went to bed early, without overthinking, and dreamed of nothing. For the first time in years, I slept through the night. 6 months passed after the decree. Winter receded slowly, leaving Boston damp and bare. And I, the man once accustomed to Vivian's keyboard at midnight and phone calls past dark, learned to listen to silence. My mornings began with small things: opening the window, drawing in the cold air, brewing coffee slowly, reading a few pages on the balcony. From the little apartment in Beacon Hill, I could see the maples budding, a pale green whisper that everything can start again, even late. I planted a small pot of basil on the sill, just because I love its scent when I cook. Each afternoon I watered it, wiped the counters, arranged books by the color of their spines. Ordinary tasks made me feel more real than ever. No more striving to be enough for someone else. No more being measured against fantasies in the mind of a person who once called me husband. One Sunday, Marianne Clark, a widow of 3 years from my parish, knocked on my door. She invited me to a small reading group she hosted every Thursday evening. "Nothing serious," she said with a gentle smile. "We read, talk, and eat the cookies I bake." I agreed, partly out of courtesy, partly out of curiosity. The first night they read The Old Man and the Sea. When we reached the passage where the old man wrestles alone with the great fish, Marianne looked at me and said softly, "He didn't lose. He just refused to pretend." I smiled. It had been a long time since I'd heard such a true sentence. After the meetings, she and I would stay to clean up, washing glasses. We talked lightly about small habits, the weather, the smell of fresh roasted coffee, and how getting older doesn't mean you're done with new things. Marianne was simple. Gray sweater, an old silver necklace, a steady, warm voice. In her eyes there was no judgment, only something I thought extinct. Care without conditions. She loved the things I once considered. Small, slow dinners, a single glass of wine, the quiet satisfaction of folding the morning paper. To her, that was a full life. I remembered Vivian calling those things signs of stagnation, lack of ambition. I didn't feel sad anymore. Maybe the difference between us was this. She chased success, and I finally chose truth. Sometimes, a few of Vivian's old friends texted me. "Harold, we didn't know about Cole. We're truly sorry for believing wrong." I answered briefly, "It's all right. We're all blind sometimes." After everything, I realized I'd lived under the weight of demands for years. I tried to become the version someone else wanted and called it love. Now, each morning in my small place, not having to prove my worth to anyone felt like real freedom. I relearned safety in a small kitchen, slicing bread, searing fish, brewing tea. The basil's scent filled the room, blending with a crackly radio playing jazz. I didn't need more. One April morning, Marianne and I went to the old neighborhood farmer's market. She picked a sourdough loaf. I chose cherry tomatoes. At the butter stand, she giggled when an overripe avocado burst in her hand. I laughed with her, a tiny moment, but I knew I was alive. On the way home, Marianne asked, "Do you ever think peace is a kind of luxury?" I nodded. Yes. But it's reserved for the honest first with themselves. That afternoon, I sat by the window and wrote a few lines in a notebook I'd neglected. I didn't lose a wife. I stepped out of a play. The April sky was a clean blue, clouds drifting like a newly found breath. I set the pen down, took a sip of coffee, and smiled. For the first time in years, I wasn't living in the past, I was coming back to myself. That evening, honey-colored light stretched across the floorboards. I was watering the basil when my phone buzzed. On the screen appeared a name I thought I'd never see again. Vivian Rhodes. I stood still for a few seconds, listening to my heartbeat. Reason told me not to answer, there was nothing left to say. But another part, tired yet curious, wanted to tie off the last loose thread between us. I picked up. Her voice was hoarse, a little shaky. "Harold, it's me." I didn't respond, just listened to her sigh on the line. She spoke slowly, each word feeling for a path in the dark. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." A sentence so simple it felt strange. No excuses, no tears, just a late confession. She continued, "I'm not calling to defend myself. Honestly, I have nothing left to protect. After Cole left, we stayed together only 6 weeks. Turns out, what we loved wasn't each other, but the thrill of being hidden. The secret made everything feel alive. Once there was nothing to hide, there wasn't a reason to stay." Her voice roughened, like someone who'd lived through a winter without sun. "You know," she said, "when the apartment was empty, I realized what I'd ruined. Not the marriage, but myself." I was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Why call me today?" "Because," she hesitated, "I don't want my life to end in silence like this. I needed to say it out loud, even if it changes nothing." A long hush followed. I heard wind on her side. Maybe she was on the porch where we used to drink coffee on Sunday mornings. Then she asked, very softly, if I had told the truth sooner, would anything have been different? I took a breath. "Vivian, the problem was never your feelings. It was choosing deceit. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed yourself by choosing to live by pretending." For the first time, Vivian didn't react. No defenses, no righteousness. She was simply quiet for a long time, then said softly, "You're right. I turned everything into a story about me. Even when apologizing, I was thinking how it would make me look. Her voice trailed off and fell silent. I heard a long exhale, like a fine rain on a tin roof. "I heard you're still in Boston?" she asked at last. "Yeah, I'm still here. Life is simple. Books, coffee, and a few real friends." I told her about Marianne from church, about the reading group, the light conversations without judgment. "She likes honesty," I said. "Not to be right, but to avoid living tired." On the other end, Vivian was quiet for a long time. Then she said, genuinely for the first time in years, "I'm happy for you, Harold, truly. I wish I knew how to love like that. Not to prove anything, just to be." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Thank you for calling, Vivian. I hope you find your own peace." "Thank you," she said. "And I'm sorry for making you learn to live again the hardest way." I started to speak, then didn't. A long enough pause for both of us to know the words had run out. I hung up and set the phone on the table. Outside, the sun was setting, bathing, old rooftops in soft orange. Spring wind slipped through the cracked window, carrying the scent of basil and distant birdsong. I sat still, watching the sky turn lavender, feeling as if I'd just seen off a figure who occupied half my life. No hate, no love, just a quiet gratitude. The disaster that once shoved me into a pit had become the key that freed me. Because of it, I learned that freedom isn't leaving someone else. It's forgiving yourself for trusting the wrong person. I wrote in my notebook, "Truth is the only steady light in a marriage. When it goes out, love is only a shadow." That night, I didn't close the window. Spring air brushed the curtains and my shoulder like the greeting of a new life. I lay down, listened to the city shift softly outside, and let the breeze pass through. May arrived like a breath. Boston's sky was unusually clear, and I, at 57, began to understand myself more than ever. For years, I thought loyalty was a debt to be kept to the end. Now I know loyalty isn't a flaw. It becomes dangerous only when given to the wrong person. I'm no longer ashamed of loving fully, nor do I blame myself for trusting badly. Trusting is never the sin. The sin is insisting on trusting someone who's stopped deserving it. I learned how to draw boundaries in love. Loving someone doesn't mean erasing yourself. I used to confuse kindness with self-sacrifice, gentleness with silent endurance. Now I understand if you keep erasing yourself just to make someone stay, one day there will be no one left to love, because even you will have disappeared. I've also come to see ambition differently. Vivian once called me unmotivated. But after everything, I realized ambition without integrity is just a destructive project disguised as success. It devours love, conscience, and truth. I'm grateful that, in the end, the only thing I managed to hold on to was my conscience. The very thing I once thought was my weakness turned out to be the strongest pillar I had. I no longer apologize for wanting peace. For years, living with Vivian, I felt ashamed every time she said, "You're afraid of change." Now I know she was wrong. Peace isn't fear, it's the choice to live, not to run. It isn't avoidance, it's knowing when to stop. Peace is my compass now, pointing me toward what's real. I started sharing those lessons with others. At my parish, there's a small group of young couples in their 20s just starting out, still clumsy with money and trust. They asked me to teach them how to manage finances, but I told them this instead. Money isn't just numbers. It's a story between two people about respect, honesty, and sharing. A marriage can't last if both don't understand the value of what they're spending together. I opened my laptop and showed them how to read bank statements, how to spot red flags of financial imbalance, and how to protect themselves when love gets tangled with control. Some couples stayed after class, telling me about their fights over joint accounts. I only smiled and said, "What matters isn't who holds the money, it's whether you're both looking in the same direction." From those evenings, a bigger idea was born. I founded a small charity, the Clear Ledger Fund, to help older adults who've been financially abused by their children or spouses. Every month, we provide legal advice, help them set up financial plans, and sometimes just listen. No one deserves to feel worthless because someone stole their money or their trust. Marianne was the first to volunteer to help manage the fund. She said, "You handle the numbers, I'll handle the people." Every Saturday, we cook a big pot of soup for everyone who comes by. She always jokes, "Love, like soup, only tastes right when stirred together." I laugh every time. I doubt she knows it, but that line is warm enough to carry me through an entire winter. In the late afternoons, sunlight filters through the kitchen window. Marianne smiles, her silver hair catching the light as she stirs the steaming pot. I stand beside her, slicing sourdough bread, my heart light as air. I don't need fancy dinners or expensive wine. Just two people, present and honest, that's enough. On a small wooden shelf, I keep a new picture frame. In it, I'm smiling, not the polite smile I used to wear for others, but my own, a smile without fear of judgment. It took me years to find that face again. That night, after Marianne left, I sat alone at my desk, opened my notebook and wrote, "Freedom sometimes wears the mask of loss. It takes away what you thought you couldn't live without, only to give you back yourself." I closed the notebook, turned off the lights, and stepped out onto the balcony. The May wind was cool, carrying the scent of magnolia from the street below. I leaned on the railing, eyes closed. In that quiet moment, I knew I had truly forgiven not just Vivian, but also the man I used to be, the one who endured too much and looked away from the truth. I believe that, in the end, not everyone needs to win. Some of us just need enough peace to believe in kindness again. And at 57, I finally found it not in another woman, but in the honesty of my own heart. One late summer morning, I returned to my old house on Arlington Street to hand over Vivian's share of the property, as ordered by the court. The familiar road, the tree-lined sidewalks, but this time my steps were steady. The iron gate still creaked the same way. The house, once a home, now stood quiet. Everything had been neatly divided. Half a painting on the wall, a few crystal glasses, the 6-seat table now down to 3. I looked around and felt no pain, only calm, as if the memories had finally been sorted back into their rightful place. Vivian arrived on time. No makeup, polite, composed. The performance was over. We didn't talk much. Two adults, signing papers, checking numbers, nodding once. "Be well," she said. "Thank you," I replied. "I wish you the same." No anger, no resentment, just two people who finally understood that not every ending is a failure. Sometimes it's simply how fate gives freedom back to those who lost it. On my way home, I stopped by the glass tower of Solstice Dynamics. Same building, same glow. But I no longer felt like the man standing outside waiting for his wife in a power suit. I was myself, grounded and free. At the reception desk, I left an envelope addressed to the board of directors. Inside was a single note: "Thank you for choosing to correct things with integrity. Not just for me, but for everyone who still believes truth has a place in this world." Driving back, I passed the red brick church where Vivian and I were married 30 years ago. Sunlight poured through the stained glass, scattering colors on the worn stone floor. I lit a candle not for lost love, but for a life that had run its course. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Thank you for giving me enough pain to grow, enough mistakes to understand my own heart." That evening, I sat in the kitchen with Marianne. The warm light softened her face. I told her the whole story, no hiding, no embellishing, no masking the foolish parts of myself. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, she placed her hand on mine and said softly, "I ache for what you endured, but I'm proud of what you chose." We sat there, listening to the rain tapping against the window, and I realized that sometimes life doesn't need a new beginning, just the right ending. Later, I turned on my camera, leaned back in my chair, and spoke not as a confession, but as a message for anyone who's ever lived in that same space between loyalty and betrayal. Looking straight into the lens, I said, if someone out there sees themselves in me, choose truth first. It hurts, but it frees you. No one can live peacefully inside a lie for too long. I turned off the camera and let out a long breath. The night breeze drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth. My chest felt light, as if I'd finally set down a stone I'd been carrying for half a lifetime. Out on the balcony, I watched the city lights shimmer. My life, which once felt closed after the storm, was quietly opening again, not with noise or grand gestures, but with the stillness that lets you hear your own heartbeat. Marianne stepped out, holding 2 cups of tea. She smiled and asked, "What are you thinking about?" I smiled back. That sometimes, freedom doesn't come when we walk away, it comes when we stop running. She didn't answer. She just rested her head on my shoulder. Below us, the city glowed. Above, the moon peeked through the clouds. And I knew whatever tomorrow held, I had become the man I once promised myself to be. Someone who knows how to love, how to set boundaries, and how to honor the truth. I closed my old notebook and wrote one last line. Every ending is just another way to begin. My story may have come to an end, but maybe, somewhere out there, someone is still living through the same doubts I once did. If you've watched this far and see even a small piece of yourself in my story, please remember, truth might hurt, but it never leads you astray. It's the only light that can guide you out of the dark room called blind hope. I don't tell this story for sympathy, but to remind you, it's never too late to start again. And you're never weak for choosing honesty. If this story touched you, leave me a few words in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what kept you here till the end. I truly want to know, because every word you share is proof that none of us are alone on this road to healing. And if you believe someone out there might need this today, share it with them. Hit like, subscribe, and stay with me a little longer, because your presence, even in these quiet minutes, is the greatest gift I could ever receive. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart. See you in the next story, where we keep believing in the light, even after walking through the dark.